What's up, everybody? And thank you so much for tuning in for another author chat. Today, I'm excited to have author David Dalglish, or we've actually realized that he's playing the role of Arwen from Fellowship of the Ring today with his lovely blinding light in the background. But David, how are you doing today?
I am doing okay.
I mean, besides, having a super bright house today.
It's dark in here. We've been trying to solve this for like the past 15 minutes. It's actually really dark in this room. So the sliver of light coming from a doorway that I cannot close is like being treated as a supernova by the camera. So I apologize.
Well, we're excited to have you. Clearly, we're going to talk a little bit about yourself. But obviously, we're going to be talking about your brand new novel, The Bladed Faith, which was just released yesterday. Just check out that beautiful cover. Let's see if I can actually get this to stand back up. I was struggling with it earlier, so there we go. But David, just kind of first of all, just congratulations on the new book release. But second, just can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, kind of who you are growing up? Did you write growing up, and then kind of when did you start taking writing seriously? And that was amazing. And then I just tilted my camera like that.
Very nice. It's an earthquake happening. Bladed Faith. It's such a long book. It's so heavy. It shook the foundation of your house when you put it back down. I was basically just the quiet, nerdy, gifted kid throughout all of like elementary school. So I was like bringing in gigantic novels smuggled into my backpack, even all the way like I in like the fourth grade, my teacher tried to come to my parents in a meeting and suggest that I brought smaller, more age-appropriate books in because she thought I was intimidating the rest of the children, and that's why I was having issue making friends, and not just me being a insanely shy bookworm being the reason. Thankfully, my parents were like, no, we're going to let him read what he wants to read. No, I just always liked, for the most part, loved fantasy. I got a friend about 9th, 10th grade. I'd read like Tolkien and Lewis, the standards that were available in I grew up in a very tiny town, so very small library. What fantasy I could get was pretty limited. And then a friend of mine gave me R.A. Salvatore's Drizzt series, the Dark Elf trilogy in particular. And I basically reread that trilogy like once a year through all of high school. I was just absolutely adored it. You can find influences of it really strongly in some of my earliest stuff, especially like the half-orcs. But I was always just kind of writing little bits of this and that. I like when my parents bought a word processor for Christmas once, I like wrote this 60-page, I was determined I was going to publish this sucker, this 60-page story called The Crystals of Power that was just a blatant rewrite of Final Fantasy V or Too Fast that I hadn't even played the game. I had just read the Nintendo power of it over and over again and absorbed enough of the plot that I then rehashed it in my own, which probably gives a better example of who I was growing up than anything else I've said. And then senior year, I had a creative writing class. And the creative writing class was just, our teacher would take us to the computer lab every single day and just like, I don't care if you're writing poetry, a novel, short stories, whatever it is, you just have to be working on something. And I was just like in heaven. I was like, I can write, I can just do what I want. I have a dedicated hour to write every single day. So I ended up writing stuff that would end up becoming the basis for the half-orcs. Even in high school, I ended up taking a lot of those characters. And then like I think I ended up writing like 100,000 word novel in the gap between high school and college and during like that summer. And those characters end up being the basis for what became the Paladins actually. And then eventually I just started writing and had my own little stories that I assumed would never ever get published, especially the half-orcs, because I had this 300,000 word violent, absurd D&D monstrosity. And I'm reading like at the time, like fantasy was going really hard into like the low fantasy grim and gritty era at this point. So like everything was like, oh, publishers and agents aren't interested in elves and orcs and magic and all this D&D stuff. I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure there's probably some people who would like it, but no one, not enough. And then, so when I eventually kind of looked into self-publishing, I was like, there's got to be at least a few people that grew up reading R.E. Salvatore like I did that love this D&D level of fantasy and absurdity and the sword fights and people throwing fireballs at each other. And basically before I could panic and freak out and wimp out, I did the best I could to edit it, got a cover art and uploaded. I basically took what I had written and chopped into like 3 novels, and then it did okay. So I kept going, and then that did okay. And then eventually I did a spin-off from the main series with Dance of Cloaks, and that one did really well and basically officially kind of launched my career and got other publishers to notice me and eventually got offers for Shadow Dance. And then I basically kind of slowly transitioned over to being an Orbit traditional author with just the every now and then I'll throw a half-orc novel out there because I haven't technically finished that series. So I owe them at least one more novel even now.
And you really hit me in like the nostalgia when you said Nintendo Power. I'm like, oh gosh. Oh, the childhood.
I had a every time you renewed Nintendo Power, my grandpa, as a gift to us, would give us a year-long subscription to Nintendo Power. And every time you renewed it, you got to pick like one strategy guide. Mm-hmm. And one year I begged and pleaded, and we got the strategy guide for what was Final Fantasy 3 or FF6. And I had that with me. I lost it only about 5 years ago we moved. I kept it all the way into my 30s. I loved that thing. I would use it like when I'd be writing stories, I'd flip through and had this huge list of all these swords and weapons. I would use those for names when I was writing, and I would go through the bestiary for enemy ideas and read through it again and again because I loved that game. And I just all the plots, stole all of it, rehashed all of it and all these old stories. It and Chrono Trigger basically became like pseudo fan fiction that was my writing from like 6th to 9th grade.
Yeah, but I remember my dad just had like stacks and stacks of them when I was growing up because he was actually the gamer in our household, and honestly, I mean, he still games more than I do. But you know, we would just have stacks of them just kind of like stuffed in a cabinet, so I just like go through them when I was younger before I really started getting into Zelda and Final Fantasy and stuff like that. And when I was in elementary school, I actually had it was a FF7 like art book, and I was kind of the quiet kid in school, and so I would take that with me and I would hand draw everything out of the art book because I wanted to be. And so I actually did that for like one of our like big art projects for the year. You know, they go up above the lockers and you get the like the first, second, third place ribbons. So I didn't win. It looked really good. I thought it was awesome.
What did you draw?
Oh, what did I draw? Baphomet. What else did I draw? I drew like 6 or 7 different things. I wish I'd kept it. I had it for a while, just spun up with a rubber band, like in my closet at my old house. But it has since gone. I can't find the art book anymore. So, but
it happens.
Go ahead.
No, it happens. You move enough, and eventually, when you're packing things, you're like, "Do I really need this old nostalgic thing from my childhood?" And then about a year or two later, you decide, no, actually, I did need that old nostalgic thing of my childhood I threw out. I do wish I still had my Final Fantasy 3 guide.
I did know that thing that I've like stapled and retaped together a few times just to make sure like I didn't lose any pages. And sometimes the pages are out of order, but it's fine. I know where they're supposed to go. Goodness. So, you know, clearly you've been writing for quite a while. How has your writing process changed from like that first self-publishing, you know, experience to now where you've published several series with Orbit?
Like when I very first started, like before I even had a chance of like self-publishing or anything like that, it was just I wrote when I had spare time. I tried, especially like when me and my wife were both working at Pizza Hut, I would try to write when she was on her shift. I often wouldn't, and then I'd feel horribly guilty about it. But basically I would just kind of write in order, very little planning, just kind of winging it. And I would make dramatic story shifts just when I felt like it. Characters that were meant to live would die, or that were meant to die would live. And I'd have to reshape like the entire plot line. This is easily most noticeable if you read the half-orcs, so where like just things happen and then more crazy things happen and then just wild swings. And you probably can't tell where it's going to go, which is part of the fun of it because I didn't have a clue where I was going. And in that series in particular, I had no one to tell me no or gently poke me like, maybe you should stop, other than my wife. My wife was she'd read it and be like, hey, was that a good idea? And she'd be like, oh, that was great. And every now and then be like, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't kill that main character. Like, all right, fine, like, delete the chapter. Like, they live for now.
They live so we can
They live.
continue the saga.
Um, I've grown a bit tamer and calmer since then, especially about killing characters off, because eventually you do run out of them. I was writing, it would be Half Orcs #8, and I just had a little moment where it's at a funeral and one of the characters is just breaking down angry that he's had to give so many eulogies, which I have actual like eulogies and little funeral moments for these characters. I try to treat it real, and I have him like list all the characters who have died that are close to him that he's had to like mourn or give eulogies for, and I'm just writing out the list. I'm like, oh god, this is a lot of people. And I just started feeling nostalgic, like, oh, I can't do anything with those characters anymore unless I do flashbacks, which like half my other series are. The Paladins, Breaking World, and Shadow Dance were all flashbacks, some involving main characters who are dead in the main storyline. Like, which is always a bit of a shock if people read the series effectively chronologically instead of the order I publish them. Like, oh, these characters are great, and they get to the Half Orcs, like, why did this character I love die in a random chapter in the middle of book 4? What the hell? And then I get angry emails, and I generally laugh, and I'm like, I didn't know I was going to do all that other stuff.
No, you're just sitting there just going.
Oh, for the most part, I'm amused. I like, there's only like 2 or 3 characters that I've killed where I've legitimately regretted and wished I hadn't. Usually because like the impact was just meh, or I was just going for actual shock value instead of like, you know, the story felt like it. But at this point, I honestly don't know the number. I think 30 novels now. I honestly do not have to count. I'm on novel 29 or 30 or so, somewhere
Wow.
in that vicinity. I'm way more structured now, because I used to always write in order. I'd never skip around. I would never, because I would use like, I would have like epic moments I knew I was leading toward. Like, oh, there's going to be this big confrontation between these 2 characters, and be all emotional. I would use that as like the carrot on the stick to get me through the stuff that I was struggling with. Like, I just got to get through this battle, or I got to get through this moment, and I'll finally get to reward myself for that big epic moment I've had in my head for years. And eventually that just kind of stopped being enough, or I would just start like, my novels would have like really inconsistent pacing where you could tell I reached the part I did not want to be there, and I would just like blitz through it super fast. And yeah, and eventually I started experimenting with just writing out of order. Like, if I to the point now where I would like outline a single page, like I'd draw lines and like divide it into like 3 little pillars of like, here's storyline A, here's main story B, here's main story C, and it'd be like each a third of a page long. And then I started overall like plotting out more and more. And then I started plotting out like 3 or 4 chapters at a time. Like, I would just like, chapter 34, this will happen. Chapter 35, this will happen. Chapter 36, and bounce around those few. Until eventually, with one of the Paladins books, I just wrote the entire ending backwards, because I could not figure out how to get to the end. So I just wrote the end, and then like I wrote like this emotional goodbye to a character that died, and then I wrote the scene where they died, and then I wrote the battle that led to where they died, and then I wrote the battle that was the big battle that led to that smaller battle, and then I wrote the chapter leading into that fight where everyone's kind of preparing, and then suddenly, poof, I had written all the battles and the scenes and the character death. I was like, oh, that worked really well. And that was like an eye-opener moment. That was like, at that point, that would have been like novel 22. Let's see, that would have been before I wrote. Yeah, that was like novel 2022. So then I started giving myself permission to write more out of order, but to write out of order, you have to have a much stricter outline and kind of have a better idea of where the story's going to go. So I started experimenting with that more and more until Voidbreaker in particular, I wrote from the very beginning out of order. Like, I wrote descriptions of every chapter, plotted the whole thing out, and then just started writing the chapters I felt like writing, which actually helped a lot with like struggles and writer's block I was having, where I'd sit down. If you're writing in order, if you're struggling with a chapter, you stop writing, and then you come back the next day, the chapter you were struggling with is still staring you in the face. and nothing has changed. I just got to the point now where if I would just sit down and be like, I don't know if I feel up for that difficult chapter. So what's a chapter that'll be fun to write? Here's a chapter where these two characters basically bicker angrily at each other because they're brothers and they're trying to murder each other or something like that. I'm like, oh, that'll be fun to write. I love those type of chapters. And I'll just like write that one. And I'll just like slowly like finish off all the various chapters, and the amount of ones to choose from narrows. And eventually I'd like, well, I've only got a few difficult chapters. And the downside to that is then I ended up with like in Voidbreaker, I was like, oh, I have nothing but like 10 battle chapters to write. I've avoided all the fight scenes, and now I have like 10 chapters of fight scenes to write in a row, and I have no one to blame but myself.
Like I got all the fun, hilarious scenes out of the way, and now just like got to figure out how I not make all these sound exactly the same or just one long battle.
All the dialogue, fun stuff's gone, but now I got the fight scenes. But it did mean that I was generally more patient with the fight scenes, because I would be like, all right, let's sit down and get it done. And, but no, because that was the first one I wrote truly out of order, I hadn't quite gotten the hang of things, and I didn't outline enough as I probably should have been. So like, I think the most embarrassing thing that ended up happening is I had almost everything finished. Like I was getting ready to like finalize the rough draft to send it to my editor, Breet, and I realized that I had because I kept rearranging things. I'm like, oh, this isn't working because this plot isn't in this event. So I like take chapter 37 and make it 34 and change the order of this and that and try and get everything lined up. And eventually I had a character die in chapter 35 and then reappear in chapter 38 and did not catch that until like I was getting ready to send it to my editor. And I was bemoaning on Twitter. I'm just like head in my hands, like, oh my God, I have a dead character returned to life. And it's just normal. He just like walks in alongside one of the other characters, has full dialogue. And I'm just like, I have to rewrite this whole chapter. That doesn't work.
Holy flashback, Batman.
Like, no flashback or anything. This was just like, all right, let's remove the dead character completely. Now let's rewrite. And then because the other issue is the person that he's with is kind of upset that the character is dead. So instead of walking in with, character A by their side, now they're walking in without him and kind of upset because someone they cared about died. Should probably have that affect them and not have them just like, la la la,
let's go drink some ale.
Just because I forgot it happened doesn't mean the character should forget it happened. It was probably more important to them at this point. So yeah, I've tried to do a little bit better about that. And I just thankfully did not have as much issues with Bladed Faith in that regard. That one also didn't need near as much reordering or reworking compared to most stuff. Like as a whole, that one was pretty easy to overall structure and figure out what happened when, with only the beginning of the novel, especially because it's got, you've read it at this point, the beginning skips forward multiple times I was kind of stuck with this issue of, I want the main character to be trained and efficient and be believably dangerous as an assassin, which means not having him have, hey, look, this 16-year-old kid, here's some swords and 3 months of training. You can now go hang with all the professional soldiers. Like, no, it takes, I think I have him trained for like a year and a half and then have a duel with one of his mentors and just get the crap beat out of him. And the mentor's like, that wasn't even close. Are you sure he's worth training anymore? Like, you guys had like a year and a half to train him and he couldn't hang with me. Maybe we should get plan B, which of course the main character overhears and is just like, ow. And then resolves, very nice. Then resolves to work harder and, then another year skip happens and stuff like that. But
yeah, it's nice that you don't just do like a 3-month montage and then all of a sudden he's like a perfectionist.
Like, no, this is not I had 2 sword lessons, I'm now a professional. Because one of the things I did was like the villains in the novel, they've got the paragons who are supposed to be basically super soldiers or the space marines, if you will, of like fantasy. And I can't have them built up to be these giant magically enhanced plate mail wearing monstrosities wielding 2-handers that would make Cloud Strife jealous, and then have some 16-year-old kid show up with a month of training and be like, I can fight you, and then
just shows up with 1 dagger. And he's like, I got this.
I even tried to make sure in the very first fight he has against one, he still nearly botches there's a moment by we still nearly botches things, nearly gets killed. They do end up killing the Paragon, but it's like 7 against 1. And then I guess I should probably explain the theme of the book is the main character Cyrus's island is invaded and taken over by this empire, and the initial fight fails pretty miserably, and he's kept alive as like this little puppet promise, like, hey, we're going to eventually set up a regent, and this island is like months and months of sailing away. Obviously we're not going to be here forever. Maybe we'll put him back on the throne, but you'll just be paying tithes, and you'll have made some cultural changes that we want. And he's just there as like a false promise, basically. And he's rescued by people that effectively go from conquered nation to conquered nation with like, we have knowledge and money, and they're fostering rebellions against the empire because their own nation fell and its resistance crumbled. So like, well, we can't fight you on our home. We'll fight you anywhere we can, everywhere you invade. We're going to be the ones trying to set up resistance. So they go to Cyrus and like, we can train you, we can build you up. And while we're training you, while we're building you up, we're going to be giving you a reputation. We're going to try and make you like Robin Hood. We're going to try and make you this mythical person that is just whispered about, while we're also giving you actual training. And then eventually we're going to try and get you good enough that when we unleash you, you don't immediately die. And the idea being they're like, hey, we're a bunch, his name is Thorda Alai, and his 2 daughters are the main visitors that come over with all their money. And they're like, look, we need someone local. If we're going to inspire the local populace, we need someone who's here. We're strangers, we're foreigners. You, meanwhile, are the lone survivor of the royal family. This story is easy to tell everyone. It's like, this is a pretty universal story at this point. And Cyrus, meanwhile, is basically me when I was 12. Just like, I would just rather read books and being like, the bulk of the scenes when he's not training, he's in the library reading. So that's what you end up with, why there's such a lengthy montage. He has to get older, he has to build muscle, he has to train. And the point is, it's a fake it until you make it type scenario with him. Like, the rest of the crew around him are like generally more powerful than him. And that's kind of the point. They're basically like, hey, we're going to prop you up. You're going to take all the credit, and hopefully you won't die and make us all look bad, and you'll be able to launch this resistance. And then obviously it builds from there, because now he's getting actual combat experience, not just training, and him kind of evolving from that point of starting out as like a fake best assassin and suddenly getting real world training and starting to legitimately become what he was supposed to be.
So you don't want him just to like, get out there and be like, all right, I'm ready, and then just like fall flat on his face.
It almost happens anyway. I did try to make that clear on the very first chapter. It's like, all right, all this training, it's all going to be for this. And then he like completely underestimates how strong a Paragon is. It's like, oh, well, I'm dead.
Oh, hospital wing for me.
There's no hospital wing. I think, who is he? He's fighting a Paragon with like I said, like Cloud Strife level of like absurdly oversized sword. And the guy's like about to like cut him in half, like literal half, if I remember the scene right. It's been a while. And then he gets bailed out by his mentor, because teamwork versus the one solo Paragon.
Right. So we were talking a little bit off camera about, writing The Blade of Faith and then going into book 2, which you're now currently working on book 3. So you've told me, and I'm sure you've told others, that, book 2 is the best book you've ever written. That's what you are, it is pinned, you have signed it. So how, what was it like, going from book 1, writing book 2, loving it to death, and then going into writing book 3? I know you're several chapters into book 3. You're probably more chapters than you want to be into book 3.
Well, this is actually a problem that has been driving me nuts for a while now, because I, all the way back with the Half Orcs, I'd just be like, oh, The Weight of Blood is the first book in the series. The second book is so much better than the first one. And then with like Shadow Dance, I was like, Dance of Cloaks is pretty good. I still think the second book is way better. And then I kept having that happen. I'd be like, Night of Wolves is easily the weakest book in the Paladins, and the Broken Pieces, the 4th book is the best. I think Fireborn is the best book of the 3 books in the Seraphim. I think Ravencaller, which is book 2, I think is the best book of the Keepers. So like with Bladed Faith, I was like, no, I'm going to try and make the best book in the series. It's going to be this one. I'm going to get off the right foot. I'm going to get the main party established at the very start. I'm going to have tons of combat. And then I wrote the second book. I'm like, oh my gosh, the second one is so much better. Because what I like to do, I think I talked about this on TBR Con, actually, doing our little discussions over writing series, is book one is generally establishing the characters. Mm-hmm. Build up the cast, because almost every book of mine has this nice little cast, this little found family of people that love and hate each other. And the villains generally have a personal connection to the heroes, which, to do that correctly, also means having them established their establishment. Like, especially with at least two of my series, the villains did not start the book as villains. They started as part of like the group of friends and became villains. So much of what I do is building up the friendships, building up the connections, building up the world, and all that building up is not the same thing as what I then get to do in a book two or book three, is where I just start to get just knocking everything down. I get to have, I establish these two characters are close brothers in book one, and then they're fighting each other, trying to kill each other at the end of book two. And that drama and potential and angst is so much better and more satisfying than like usually the combat or whatever the conflict of like a book one is. Like, how do you compare two brothers trying to kill each other versus, a necromancer in book one? I'm talking about the half orcs at this point, but that's what ends up happening. So and so much of my books involves like just the reader enjoying the characters, liking the characters. The goal is that when you read Bladed Faith, you will like hanging out with the characters and seeing what's going on, and you're going to want them to succeed, and you're not going to like when bad things happen to them, because bad things are going to happen to them. And generally, as the series goes on, I get to, sometimes it's just me personally getting to know the characters better. I mean, that's just the nature of a thing, that my understanding of a character in book 2 or 3 is going to be overall better than a book one when I'm trying to figure out who they are. But I think just with book 2 in general, like this is it's the Sapphire Altars book 2. I think it's the one that Vagrant Gods is pretty unique for me in that I had the entire trilogy plotted out before I ever started. I have generally, even with something like The Keepers, tried to keep winging it like I used to way back in the day and only have like a vague idea of where it's going. This is the first one where like I had all the twists, all the secrets. Like there's a bunch of like stuff seeded into Bladed Faith that is not revealed at all until the end of book 2. I've got all these secrets and whatnot, and I've only got like a third of them revealed in Bladed Faith. So like this is a first for me where I could have so much prepped in advance and just start to getting like to yank back all the curtains in Sapphire Altar. I'm currently writing The Slain Divine, and I'm more struggling with it because I'm trying to put a bow on all of this, and the literal end of the second book is like this giant curtain reveal of, oh, look at all this stuff you didn't expect. And now it's me, book 3, like, okay, well, now you know it. I've got to actually deal with it. I've got to deal with the fallout. And the size of the book has just been growing and growing, and it's already chapter plotting wise. I'm like 20% through writing it. I've got like 50 chapters plotted out, which is actually, no, I'm up to 53, which is already longer than book 2. And I expect to add more because that's how it works. Because as I go through the story, I'm like, oh, I haven't fleshed out this character and this character's interaction. Oh, I probably need to add a chapter for that. Or I'll like realize a giant plot hole of like, hey, I had this fight happen. And then the next chapter happens technically 3 days later. It is a weird transition. It doesn't make sense. Maybe you should put something there. Which was a lot of finishing up Bladed Faith, and even Sapphire Altar. There was a lot of that of like, hey, I've got this really emotional, moving scene that's one of the best in the books. And then the next chapter was also a moving, emotional scene, but wasn't quite as good as the previous one. So it just felt like a step down. So I was like, all right, I need a buffer so both of these can hit properly. And oftentimes those are just the chapters are the best. I think like with the Bladed Faith, have you read the birthday party scene?
I have not.
Okay. Amusingly enough, the very first edit I got for the Bladed Faith, it was a much shorter book, the very first one that my editor Bree read, and she sent me her edit notes. She's like, hey, I've now got the best edits notes you've ever gotten. I know you're going to be excited. I'm like, all right, what is it? She's like, okay, there's too much combat. We need more scenes of people just sitting around talking and being friends with each other. And I was like, oh, those are my favorite scenes to write. Those are easy. Like that's all I've got to add. Yeah, just they're like, look, there's a friend group. Give us more time of them just being friends. So I was like, so there's a birthday party I actually threw in. Cause I was like, look, if you want me to have them like leaning in and being friends and hanging out, I'm going to go all in. Well, poor Cyrus is going to have like a birthday party. We're going to have like a little heart to heart emotional thing with like the two sisters here. Let's throw this in here. And then the chapter 13, the one in the library, that was one of those chapters. And that's currently my favorite chapter in the entire book. I don't want to spoil what's in it, but it's just a quiet moment where one of the people training Cyrus kind of stumbles into him, like basically unable to sleep. So he's like reading by candlelight in the library and just kind of has a little heart to heart up to him. And he kind of talks about his parents and losing them. And it's just absolutely my favorite chapter at this point. I even commissioned artwork for it to show off, and which I don't know if you've seen. I should make sure you've seen that one because that was great. But yeah, like two of my favorite scenes are the birthday one and that chapter in the library, and both were added at Breed's request to add in more stuff that isn't people trying to kill each other. Because I was determined.
More sweet, tender moments.
I was determined. I was like, this is going to go all out in this novel. It's going to be a great first book. So all the action, we're going to have like the gas pedal is going to hit 100 like immediately, and we're just going to floor it from the very beginning. And it was like, hey, that's great, and there's all these great action scenes, but we do need breathers every now and then. I would like to connect to these characters when they're not murdering everyone. So they're still murdering everyone, but there's times you get to hang out with them now.
Yeah,
and they ended up being my favorites. So that was another thing I learned going into writing Sapphire Altar. I was like, wow, I liked a lot of those slower, calm down chapters. Maybe I should plot a lot more of them. Maybe I should dare I say it, I should learn and do a better job at like spacing them out and going back and forth. Now that I've learned this lesson, way too late to make any structural changes to Bladed Faith.
way too late like in your 30 book career.
The 30 book, yeah. No, I joked. I was like, 30 books into my career, I feel like I just wrote the best one I've ever written. So there's always hope for you. I hope it doesn't make it sound like I think like Bladed Faith is like full of errors or something like that. No, I still love that book so much. And it's like, I have more confidence in that book than like most book ones I've ever written, to the point where I was like actually flinging it at other author friends I know, like, because no, I'm not just like, oh, you're not even going to read my stuff. You're not going to like any of my stuff. But this one, I was just like, maybe you guys could read Bladed Faith. And maybe, maybe it's okay. Like,
maybe you got some time.
I've been at this a while. I mean, I think I've had like 17 books traditionally published. Again, I'd have to count. I don't know anymore.
just a few, no big deal.
Like 6, was it 6, 3, 3? I don't know if I count Amazon's publishing wing or not for the Breaking World or not, but like with Orbit, I've had 6, 3, 3. So 12, 15. This would be the 13th book for Orbit. Not counting the short story collection. Yeah, 6 for Shadow Dance, 3 for Seraphim, 3 for Keepers, and then okay.
You're there.
Yeah. So the 14th traditionally published book, and that's not even counting the
finally got it all figured out.
It's even harder to keep track of, because like 4 of the novels for Orbit were republishing of the self-published versions. Mm-hmm. Cloaks, Mirrors, and Blades, and then what was originally going to be a separate little trilogy with I think it was called The Blood of the Watcher, which ended up being made into Shadow Dance 4, because they were like, this new series that you're also writing, that it looks like it's all the same characters and setting. I was like, yeah, it's just like a little sequel trilogy. Oh, can we just make that Shadow Dance and make it 6 books instead? Well, if you want to buy 6 books from me, I'm not going to say no.
No, you can't do it. No, it has to be 2 separate trilogies.
That's how they went from buying just the Shadow Dance trilogy into a Shadow Dance series. But yeah, so like technically I've not only had 30 some book launches, but I've also relaunched 4 of my novels. So like if you want to go by book launches, I've now had like even more. The point where I don't know what's going on anymore. I'm just trying to survive and hope people still like the crazy stories I'm cranking out. So
And hope that your editor likes them, and then she keeps,
she says so,
keep,
and I hope she wouldn't like
Orbit
me.
keeps asking you for more books, and
They are not done with me yet. We'll see what happens after book 3 of this one, I guess.
There you go. Last question I got for you: is there anything you've read recently that you'd recommend?
Throw this one on me.
Yep, of course I do.
Actually, I know it. The oh gosh, what is the name of the Megan O'Keefe's sci-fi trilogy?
The one starts with Velocity. Yeah, Protectorate.
Protectorate. Okay, I was trying to remember. Starting with Velocity Weapon. I talk about this actually at the end of Sapphire Altar, my little notes at the from the author at the end. I read Velocity Weapon. Have you read Velocity Weapon?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. So you'll know exactly what I'm talking about without me having to spoil too much. I read Velocity Weapon while I was plotting out the very basic bones of the Vagrant Gods trilogy. Like I had about 30,000 words written. It was basically just a couple character vignettes as I was trying to figure out who they were, and I was starting to plot things out. And I read Velocity Weapon, and there are 2 really big twists in Velocity Weapon. Obviously, I won't say what they are, but they are pretty good. They are, everyone remembers it, everyone talks about them, how this you think you know what's going on and where things are and how things stand, and then you get to one chapter and she pulls the rug out on you, like, oh, never mind, I have to recontextualize everything that's happening. And then like another 5 chapters later she does it again. And I was just so jealous. And I actually was because we're both published by Orbit, I get to take advantage of the best thing published by Orbit is I get to contact Orbit authors and be like, hey, can I talk about your book? And they don't just immediately like ignore me. They'll actually talk back. So at this point, I would like to, I've chatted with Megan so much, I'd call her very much a friend. We play Final Fantasy 14 together at this point. But I was like actually chatting with her as I'm reading the book, kind of just like a read along and just giving my random thoughts every now and then, including both of the plot twists where she's just basically getting my dialogue and all exclamation marks. But it made me want to try to do something like that. I was like, can I do that in a fantasy novel instead of a sci-fi novel? 1 or 2 just really big twists that make perfect sense in hindsight, but recontextualize everything that's going on. Mm-hmm. And there's a smaller one in Bladed Faith, and then there's 2 gigantic ones in Sapphire Altar, which is also another reason why I love that book. So yeah, I would recommend reading Velocity Weapon to start, and the Protector trilogy whole. It's freaking fantastic. Very like, I guess it's space opera, right? Mm-hmm. Would you call it space opera? I would say so. It's definitely not hard sci-fi, but there are hard sci-fi elements still in it compared to something like Star Wars. Right. But it's in terms of overall vibes, it's got it's got the Mass Effect style cheesy stuff every now and then, and faster than light travel done for fun and not for hard science limits, stuff like that. So I would definitely recommend Velocity Weapon.
Okay, awesome. Well, David, I appreciate you taking the time to come chat with me. Everybody, it's again, fun. I'm going to show you the amazing cover for the Bladed Faith Vagrant Gods #1 that is out now everywhere in paperback, ebook, audiobook. Just go get it, read it, enjoy it, get ready for book 2 because it's even better. Looking forward to the cover for book 2. Good gosh, if book 1 is any indication.
Someone Orbit's gonna watch it. Like, David, talk about book 1. What is wrong with you? You are selling book 1. They need to read that to get to book 2.
Angela's probably gonna have a heart-to-heart email with me. She's like, love you, Angela.
She's gonna be like, do I need to come on? And she like have her lurking on the side. She probably, if she's get her a little third, like just a little unseen window, and we can see her glaring at me from the side. We're talking about the problems of the book. We're talking about why it's great. What is wrong with you? I'm sorry. I'm bad at this.
Gosh. Well, best of luck with writing book 3. I know you're enjoying writing that one right now. Good luck coming through it. And we'll have to definitely do this again. Looking forward to having you again on TBR Con next year. And yeah, if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, David.